I called off my wedding with a single sentence, and within 12 hours her father was banging on my hotel room door at 6 in the morning. My name is Jordan. I'm 32, and I built my software company from nothing, no family money, no investors in the early days, just me in a 400 square foot apartment eating instant noodles and coding until my eyes burned. 3 years into the business, I met Madison at a networking event. We dated for 3 years, got engaged 8 months ago, and the wedding was supposed to happen in 4 months. I'm not someone who acts on impulse. Every major decision in my life gets researched, analyzed, planned from every possible angle, which is exactly why I listened when my friend Billy's dad, Mr. Qley, sat me down 6 months before the wedding. Mr. Qley is a divorce lawyer who's seen every nightmare scenario you can imagine, and he told me point blank that I needed a prenup, not because Madison was a bad person, but because I had employees depending on my company, contracts worth millions, intellectual property that took years to develop. The prenup I had drafted was simple and fair. Everything I built before the marriage stays mine. Everything we build together gets split 50-50, and I genuinely thought it was the most reasonable document in the world. I brought it up the first time over dinner at Madison's favorite Italian restaurant, kept my tone casual, explained it was just smart planning for both of us, and she smiled, nodded, said she'd look it over. For 2 weeks, she didn't mention it once, didn't ask questions, didn't seem bothered, and I actually felt relieved, like we'd cleared a potential obstacle without any drama. Then the venue deadline hit. $15,000 for the final deposit, non-refundable, due in 72 hours, and I realized we needed to finalize the prenup before I committed that kind of money. I brought it up on a Tuesday night at my place. She was sitting on my couch scrolling through wedding Pinterest boards, and the moment I said we should sign the prenup before the venue payment, her entire energy shifted. Her smile vanished. Her shoulders went rigid. She closed her laptop with this slow, deliberate motion, and I knew immediately that something had changed in the 2 weeks since our first conversation. She looked at me and said, "This is an insult," and her voice had an edge I'd genuinely never heard before, sharp and cold. And she kept going, said I didn't trust her, said her parents had been married 30 years without any prenup, said if I really loved her, I wouldn't need a legal document between us. I stayed calm, tried to explain again that it wasn't about trust, it was about protecting the business and the people who work for me, about being responsible with something I'd built before we even met, but she wasn't listening to logic anymore. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's either me or that paper, you choose." And something clicked in my brain like a lock tumbling into place. In that exact moment, I understood that she didn't see my company as something I'd created. She saw it as ours already, saw herself entitled to half of everything I'd sacrificed for, every 18-hour day, every missed vacation, every risk I'd taken. The romantic illusion just evaporated like steam, and I looked at her sitting there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to crumble and apologize and choose love over logic, and I felt this cold clarity settle over me. I didn't argue, didn't try to negotiate. I just said very quietly, "I understand," and watched her face transform. She actually smiled, relaxed back into the couch, thought she'd successfully pressured me into tearing up the prenup and proving my love, and she went right back to her Pinterest boards talking about flower arrangements like the conversation had never happened. I nodded at appropriate moments, made agreeable sounds when she showed me centerpiece options, and the moment she left around 10 p.m., I walked into my home office and started making calls. I canceled the venue first, lost the $5,000 deposit we'd already paid, but saved the remaining $10,000. Then I systematically went through my wedding vendor spreadsheet and canceled everything. The caterer, the photographer, the band, the florist, the cake designer, every single contract on the list. Some vendors were confused, asked if we wanted to reschedule for a different date, and I just said no. The wedding isn't happening. Keep whatever deposits we've paid. And by 2 in the morning, my checklist was complete. I wrote a brief public post on social media, kept it neutral and professional, said Madison and I had mutually decided to call off the wedding, thanked everyone for their support and understanding, posted it, turned off my phone completely, and packed a bag. I checked into an extended stay hotel downtown, one of those corporate places with a kitchenette and decent Wi-Fi, and I slept better than I had in months. No anxiety dreams about seating charts or cake flavors, just solid black sleep. When I powered my phone back on at 6 the next morning, I had 47 missed calls, 38 text messages, and my voicemail was completely maxed out. Most were from Madison, and I could see from the preview texts how her tone progressed from confused to angry to panicked over the course of the night. Some were from her mom, Frances, with increasingly frantic messages. a few from mutual friends asking what the hell happened. I didn't respond to any of them, just left my phone on the hotel desk and went to make coffee. That's when someone started pounding on my door, not knocking, pounding, aggressive heavy hits that made the door frame rattle in its hinges. I looked through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in an expensive tailored suit, red-faced, jaw clenched, radiating fury. I didn't recognize him from the angle, but I had a pretty good guess who he was. So instead of opening the door, I called down to the front desk. The woman who answered sounded genuinely nervous when she said, "Yes, sir. There's a man named Bruce here in the lobby. He says he's your fiancé's father, and he's demanding to see you. Should I send security?" And I told her no, I'd come down myself. I took my time getting dressed, finished my coffee, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed down to the lobby knowing this conversation was going to set the tone for everything that came next. Bruce threatened to destroy everything I'd built in a hotel lobby at 6:30 in the morning. And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a concerned father. I was dealing with someone who'd spent his entire life getting exactly what he wanted through intimidation. He was waiting by the elevators when I stepped out, arms crossed, feet planted wide like he owned the building. And the moment he saw me, he started walking toward me with the kind of aggressive, purposeful stride that's designed to make you back up. The front desk staff were watching nervously. I noticed a security guard had positioned himself near the main entrance, and I kept my face completely neutral as Bruce got close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. He didn't yell, which actually surprised me. Instead, he spoke in this low, controlled voice that was somehow more threatening than shouting. Told me I had humiliated his daughter, embarrassed his entire family, made them look like fools in front of everyone they knew, and he expected me to fix this situation immediately. I let him talk, didn't interrupt, just stood there with my hands in my pockets and my expression blank, waiting for him to run out of steam. When he finally paused, I said very calmly that the relationship was over and there was nothing to discuss, and that's when his whole approach shifted. His face relaxed into this fake friendly smile. His tone went from aggressive to reasonable, and he started talking about how young people make mistakes under stress, how wedding planning brings out the worst in everyone, how if I just came to dinner at their house we could talk this through like adults and find a compromise that worked for everyone. He said Madison was heartbroken, said she'd overreacted about the prenup and regretted it, said we could work something out that protected my business while still showing trust in our relationship, and the whole time he was talking I was reading the subtext. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about control, about getting me back into their orbit where they could manage the narrative and apply pressure until I signed away my protection. I told him no, the decision was final, and I watched the mask slip completely off his face. He leaned in close enough that I had to resist the urge to step back, and said, "You don't want to make an enemy out of me." And his voice had gone ice cold, and I understood right then that this was a promise, not a threat, a preview of exactly what was coming if I didn't fall in line. I didn't flinch, didn't respond, just held his stare for 3 long seconds, then turned around and walked back to the elevator while he stood there in the middle of the lobby. Over the next 2 weeks, Madison launched what I can only describe as a reputation assassination campaign, and I only heard about it through mutual friends because I'd blocked her number, her social media, every possible contact point. She was telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I'd become paranoid and unstable, that the stress of running the company had made me erratic, and she was genuinely worried about my mental health. She positioned herself as the caring, devoted fiancée who'd tried everything to help her struggling partner, but had been pushed away. And the scary thing was that some people believed it because I wasn't defending myself or offering my side of the story. I made a conscious, deliberate choice to stay completely silent, didn't post anything on social media, didn't call friends to explain, didn't try to control the narrative, just let her talk while I focused on practical legal steps. I had Mr. Cole draft a formal eviction notice giving Madison 30 days to remove her belongings from my apartment. It was legally airtight and professionally worded, sent via certified mail with all the proper documentation, and when she received it, she apparently showed up at my office building crying and demanding to see me. My assistant buzzed me to say Madison was in the lobby refusing to leave until she talked to me, and I told her to contact building security, didn't go down there, didn't engage at all, just had her escorted out. Madison's mom, Frances, started calling me from different phone numbers because I'd blocked her main line, leaving these long, rambling voicemails about family and forgiveness and how I was breaking her baby's heart over a piece of paper. I'd listened to about 5 seconds of each message, just enough to confirm it was her, then hit delete, and I kept meticulous records of every single attempt at contact with timestamps and call duration. That's when the business attack started, subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention to patterns. My main supplier for server equipment suddenly wanted to reduce my credit line, claimed it was just routine policy review, nothing personal, but the timing made my instincts prickle. Then a client I'd been working with for 2 years called to cancel a major contract renewal, gave some vague corporate excuse about budget constraints and shifting priorities, but I heard through a mutual connection later that someone had reached out to their CFO with concerns about my company's stability and leadership. I started digging into Bruce's background, pulled up his business connections, and realized he sat on advisory boards with 3 of my clients, had investment ties to my equipment supplier, served on the same charity board as 2 of my potential partners, had his fingers in way more pies than I'd originally understood. He was making quiet phone calls, planting seeds of doubt, leveraging his network to squeeze my business without leaving any obvious fingerprints. And I had to admit it was impressive in a terrifying, calculated way. The move-out day was scheduled for a Saturday 3 weeks after the eviction notice, and I deliberately stayed away from the apartment. Didn't want any possibility of a confrontation or dramatic scene, so I sent Billy over there with his dad, Mr. Qley, to supervise the whole process. I gave them a detailed inventory list of everything that was mine versus what Madison had brought into the apartment, told them to document the entire move with photos and video footage, and waited at a coffee shop for updates. Billy called me around 2 in the afternoon and said everything was going smoothly. Madison had hired professional movers, and they were efficiently packing her belongings. No drama so far, and I started to relax, thinking maybe this would end without incident. Then about an hour later, Billy called back, and his voice had this edge of disbelief, said Madison had tried to take my grandfather's watch, the one that sits in a display case in my bedroom, claiming I'd given it to her as an engagement gift last Christmas. It was a complete fabrication. That watch was one of the only things I had left from my grandfather, who died when I was 12, a 1960s Omega that he'd worn every day of his adult life. And there was absolutely no universe where I would have given it away to anyone. Mr. Qley apparently stepped in immediately, very calm and professional, explained that the watch had significant documented sentimental and monetary value, wasn't listed anywhere as a shared asset or gift, and politely suggested that if Madison insisted it was a gift, she should be able to provide some evidence of the gifting occasion, photos from Christmas morning maybe, or a card, anything. She couldn't produce anything, obviously, so she backed down, but the fact that she'd even attempted it told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our entire relationship. Billy said as Madison was walking out, she stopped at the threshold, turned back toward where he and Mr. Qley were standing, and made this comment about how I was going to regret this, how her father had ways of dealing with people who crossed their family, how I had no idea what I'd just started. I told Billy to make absolutely sure that comment was documented in the formal report Mr. Qley was preparing, added it to the growing file of concerning behavior I was building, and then I sat in that coffee shop for a long time just thinking. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was exhausted, bone-tired from the constant low-level stress of waiting for the next attack, wondering what Bruce would do next, which client he'd call, which supplier he'd pressure. Part of me genuinely considered just leaving, moving to another city where Bruce's influence didn't reach, starting fresh somewhere his network couldn't touch me. But that felt like running, like letting him win through intimidation, and I'd never been the type to run from anything in my life. I pulled up the security footage from my apartment building on my phone, watched the clip of Madison and the movers leaving, saw her stop at the door and turn back toward the camera, and I made a decision right there in that coffee shop. They thought I was weak because I'd stayed quiet, thought my silence meant I was scared or defeated or willing to just take whatever they threw at me. And they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between quiet and powerless. I destroyed Bruce's reputation without ever mentioning his name in public, and the beautiful ironic thing about it was that he never saw it coming until it was too late to stop. 2 weeks after the move out, I lost my biggest client, a contract worth roughly 40% of my annual revenue, and they didn't even bother to construct a convincing lie. Just sent a corporate boilerplate email about restructuring priorities and strategic realignment. I knew it was Bruce, knew he'd made a phone call or set up a lunch meeting or pulled whatever strings that powerful connected men pull when they want to hurt someone without getting their hands visibly dirty. And I spent 3 days barely sleeping, stress eating cold pizza at 2 in the morning, genuinely wondering if my company was going to survive this coordinated assault. But somewhere around day 4, sitting alone in my office at 3 a.m. staring at financial projections and cash flow spreadsheets, I realized that panic wasn't going to save my business, emotion wasn't going to solve anything, And if I was going to fight back, it had to be smart, calculated, and completely untraceable directly to me. I started researching Bruce the same way I'd research any complex business problem, diving into public records, court filings, business registrations, news archives, property records, everything that was legally available to anyone who knew where to look and had the patience to dig. It took me about a week of late nights, cross-referencing documents and building timelines. And what I found was a pattern that honestly shocked me, even though it probably shouldn't have given what I'd already seen of his character. Bruce had been sued 6 times over the past 8 years by small contractors, electricians, plumbers, HVAC companies, construction outfits, all claiming essentially the same story with minor variations. He'd hire them for work on his commercial properties. They'd complete the job according to specifications, submit their invoices, and then Bruce would start finding phantom problems with the work, claim it wasn't up to standard, threaten to sue them for breach of contract, and eventually force them to accept settlement payments for 60 or 70 cents on the dollar just to get something. These weren't big established companies with legal departments and cash reserves for long court battles. These were family operations, father-son businesses, guys with 2 or 3 employees who needed that payment to make payroll and keep their trucks running, and Bruce had systematically squeezed every single one of them because he had the resources to wait them out, and they didn't. The court records were all public information, case numbers right there in the database, and I sat back in my office chair reading through the 6th lawsuit, thinking about poetic justice and karma, and how sometimes the universe gives you exactly the tool you need. I didn't want to be the one to expose him, didn't want this traced back to me in any possible way. So I started thinking strategically about who would benefit most from this information becoming widely known. And that's when I remembered Spark Electrical. They were one of the contractors who'd sued Bruce 3 years ago, small family business, father and 2 sons according to the case file, and they'd been forced to settle for about $12,000 less than they were contractually owed. I found their business email listed on their website, created a completely anonymous Proton Mail account using a VPN and burner details, and spent 2 careful hours crafting a message that was factual, neutral, and genuinely helpful without revealing anything about my personal connection. I didn't mention Madison, didn't mention the wedding, didn't add any editorial commentary or emotional language, just methodically laid out the pattern I discovered, provided case numbers and filing dates for all 6 lawsuits, and ended with a simple question about how many other small contractors had probably been pressured into silence because they couldn't afford to fight. I included a list of business journalists who covered construction industry issues and commercial real estate in our region, suggested this might be a story worth investigating from a business ethics angle, and hit send at 4:15 on a Tuesday morning. For 2 full weeks, absolutely nothing happened, and I started wondering if my email had just disappeared into a spam folder or been dismissed as some crank with an axe to grind. But then Billy forwarded me a link to a local business news site with a headline about predatory payment practices in the commercial construction sector. The article was thorough, professionally reported, and absolutely devastating to anyone who cared about their reputation. The journalist had tracked down and interviewed 4 of the 6 contractors who'd sued Bruce, found 3 additional contractors who'd been squeezed the same way but hadn't filed lawsuits because they couldn't afford legal fees, and laid out the entire pattern with specific dates, dollar amounts, and direct quotes from the victims. Bruce's name appeared 17 times in the article. His company's practices were explicitly described as exploitative and predatory, and the reporter had even gotten a quote from a business ethics professor at the state university about how this kind of behavior damages entire industries and destroys trust in legitimate business relationships. I read the article 3 complete times, carefully checked that there was absolutely nothing in it that could be traced back to me or my anonymous email, and then I just leaned back in my chair and watched what happened next. The story got picked up by 2 other regional outlets within 48 hours, one of them a fairly prominent business paper with circulation across 3 states, and suddenly Bruce's tactics were being discussed in contractor forums, construction industry Facebook groups, and local business association meetings. The charitable board he'd sat on for 6 years quietly announced his resignation 2 weeks later, buried the news in a routine newsletter update, but people in those circles noticed and started asking questions. One of his major real estate investors backed out of a mixed-use development project worth several million, citing concerns about reputational risk and due diligence issues, and I only knew about it because the Business Journal ran a brief follow-up article mentioning the withdrawal. Bruce wasn't destroyed, his business didn't collapse overnight, he wasn't criminally charged with anything, but his influence took a serious measurable hit. His reputation had a permanent visible stain that wouldn't wash out. And most importantly, he couldn't bully small contractors as easily anymore because everyone in the industry was watching and documenting. Madison's social media presence gradually shifted over the following months from wedding planning content and couple photos to vague philosophical posts about betrayal and learning to trust yourself after trauma, and I watched from a distance as her follower count steadily dropped because people were getting tired of the victim narrative. She'd built her entire public identity around being half of the perfect engaged couple, had cultivated this whole Instagram aesthetic based on our relationship, and now she was scrambling to rebrand herself as some kind of survivor and inspirational figure, and it just wasn't landing with her audience. I heard through mutual friends that she'd started dating someone new about 3 months after everything ended, some guy who worked in middle management at her father's company, and I felt absolutely nothing about it. No jealousy, no vindication, no anger, just this mild, detached curiosity about whether she'd try the same entitled approach with him or if she'd learned anything. My business stabilized after about 4 months of careful navigation and damage control. I landed 2 significant new clients who actually appreciated my professionalism and reliability, brought on 3 new employees, and the chronic stress headaches that had become constant during the wedding planning phase just disappeared completely. I moved to a better apartment with actual building security and a doorman, got a place with more natural light and a proper home office setup, and I put my grandfather's watch on the nightstand next to my bed where I could see it every morning when I woke up. Sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd think back to that moment when Madison gave me the ultimatum, how she'd been so absolutely confident that I'd choose her over protecting what I'd built, and I'd wonder if she ever understood that it wasn't really about the prenup at all. It was about what the prenup revealed about how she viewed my work, my sacrifice, my years of effort. She'd shown me exactly how she saw my company and my success, and once I saw that clearly there was no possible way to unsee it or go back. Bruce never contacted me again after that morning in the hotel lobby, and I genuinely don't know if he ever figured out that I had anything to do with the article that damaged his reputation. But part of me hopes he spent at least some time wondering, questioning, maybe suspecting that the quiet guy who wouldn't fight back in person had actually been planning something far more effective than a confrontation. I look at my grandfather's watch sometimes, watch the second hand move in perfectly steady increments around the face, and I think about how the best, most important decisions in life are usually the ones you make when you're calm. When you're thinking clearly, when you're not being manipulated by emotion or pressure or someone else's expectations about who you should be. Ending that engagement was the best business decision I ever made, and I don't mean that cynically or coldly. I mean it literally and precisely, because it taught me that sometimes protecting what you've built means walking away from what you thought you wanted. And there's a very specific kind of freedom that comes from choosing your actual future over someone else's fantasy about who you should be. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.